Hello, SPP faculty and staff. Thank you again for the opportunity yesterday to present and discuss a little bit about the impact of nutrition on our children's academic behavior performance in your classroom and at home. So I received a lot of questions after the session through email, through Facebook message, and even after class. So I really appreciate you all taking the time to reach out. And they were really good questions, and I thought I would send this really quick follow-up now that I have a little bit more time to kind of dive into the details. And I'm also on this kind of FAQ, so to speak, going to put some links to hopefully help address some of the questions, especially with recipes and things like that, with how to incorporate healthy eating habits for your kids. Okay, so the first question I had was this, which was a really good one. Which food additives are bad? In the packet that you received yesterday, so it's the one that looks like this that was on the table. And if you didn't pick it up, that's okay. Just feel free to reach out to me. You can email me at the h2lifenb@gmail.com, and I can certainly send this over. But there are some details about names to look for example, alternative names for sugar when you're reading your nutrition labels. And then, of course, these are some of the things that I mentioned on our discussion yesterday. So like the high fructose corn syrup, the mention of MSG, aspartame, but why are those bad, right? And we talked a little bit about the little regulation that the FDA has, but more importantly, let's talk about what it actually does to your child's brain. So when we think about the food additives, right? These excitotoxins, or sometimes they're referred to as neurotoxins. Remember, our children's brains are developing, and the younger they are, the faster their brains are growing, literally. And so it's important to think about the impact that some of these food additives might have on their brain development. And so what we want to essentially work towards, right, is feeding our bodies and our children's bodies with foods that are going to promote good brain health and good cell development. And so what happens a lot of times is those additives that are in processed foods do a lot more damage to those cells in the brain, right? So for example, like the mitochondria, right? The energy center of the cell essentially gets thrown out of balance, and the neurotransmitter can't really do what it's supposed to do, right? So, again, when we think about, the FDA says it's safe, it's on the food package, you got to remember that when those things are studied in a laboratory, a lot of times they're done on animals or even adults. And so, yes, it might be safe, for that animal or for that adult in small doses. The problem becomes with the buildup over time. So for example, when we think about products like MSG, which you might also see listed as monosodium glutamate, or you might see aspartame or sucralose. So a lot of those things, for example, are in like sugar-free products, right? So we think, for example, that we're doing something good. We're like, oh, well, it's sugar-free, it's fine. But what happens a lot of times with those products is that when things are taken out, there's something else that's being replaced. And so again, a lot of the research is showing us that these food additives are contributing to things like Parkinson's disease, seizures, Alzheimer's later down the road. And of course, remember, we were kind of talking about some of the unhealthy Ds, right? And some of the sad Ds, right? And I was really referencing ADD and ADHD. And, although a healthy diet isn't 100% of the solution to, let's say, having a child that has been diagnosed medically with ADD or ADHD, it can certainly help with those symptoms, right? It can help improve focus, right? I showed you that study, the Oxford-Durham study with the handwriting samples yesterday, and you saw, the difference that just a simple shift, right, with incorporating more fish oil, right, through those omega-3s really had an impact on that child's ability to just kind of sit down and focus. So again, when we go back to reading labels and the question of what food additives are bad, just think about it in a common sense way. If you can't pronounce what that is, or if you don't recognize it, or for example, you're looking at that nutrition label and there's beyond 10 ingredients, it's generally not going to be good for you, right? So that's just kind of a rule of thumb. So you're, trying to save time in your grocery store. I know you don't have hours and hours to spend reading each and every label, but just go for basic things. Use common sense. Do I recognize these things that are in this food? Pay attention to things like MSG, to, the high fructose corn syrup. Take a look at that list that I sent you, just so that you can kind of get familiar, and then, just practice and it'll get easy for you. I promise. Okay. Second question: the difference in omega-3s and omega-6s. So I talked a little bit about the importance of, essential fatty acids is what we're talking about, right? Because the brain is 60% fat. So, when we think about, why are fats important? I mean, fats are really important because they make up 60% of our brain tissue. So, a fat is just like a nutrient, just like when we talk about macronutrients, right? This is a macronutrient. So just like protein, just like those complex carbs that we talked about, minerals and vitamins, it's an essential part of our diet. And it's really essential for your children as well, or your students who their brains are still growing and developing. Okay. It's part of every cell of the body, right? Fat. It supplies energy. We need fat to be able to absorb, certain vitamins, vitamin D, vitamin E, vitamin K. It helps us have healthy skin and hair, helps us digest food, helps us feel, more full. The list goes on. Okay. But this is the difference here. And this is kind of where, the research gets interesting. But at its roots, right, there are essentially three types of fats. There are unsaturated fats, there are saturated fats, and then there are trans fats, which are like the man-made fats. So unsaturated fats, in a nutshell, and saturated fats are really essentially both pretty good for you, right? Unsaturated fats more so, right? They're a little bit more flexible. And saturated fats are good, but in moderation. Now, the trouble arises when the saturated fat is really high, or let's say there's too much trans fat, the man-made fat that I was referring to yesterday with like the red light foods. So we tend to see lots of trans fats, for example, in like fried fast foods or sauces and seasonings, processed foods, things like that. But again, it's trying to find that balance with unsaturated fats. So you can get those in things like seeds and nuts, right? I mentioned avocado yesterday, fish. Salmon is an excellent source, flaxseed oil, olive oil, again, just kind of think about, where can I find things that are good for me that contain fat? It's generally going to be things that are like naturally produced, right? So nothing that's made in a factory. Now, some of the saturated fats like coconut oil, butter, eggs, dark chocolate, you'll be happy about that, containing at least 70% cacao in that dark chocolate, or, chicken, grass-fed beef. And this will lead to the third question, which we'll talk about, protein and that sort of thing. But again, fats are a good thing. It's just a matter of finding that balance. And so think of that plate that we talked about yesterday, and just really making sure that, you're finding balance, you're finding that moderation, and not overdoing it so that the saturated fat will dominate or the trans fat will dominate in your child's, diet. So when we think about, for example, what's the ratio then when we get into like omega-3s and omega-6s, and are omega-6s bad? That was a question that I had. Should I just only eat omega-3s? So the answer is this: it's really finding a ratio between the two. So think about like a parking lot as an example. And I'm thinking like of a parking lot, right, filled with lots of cars. So the omega-3s and omega-6s really have to work together. But where we tend to find difficulty and medical issues arise is when the omega 6s sometimes dominate, right? And so what happens, using that car lot example, is that if there are too many omega 6s in that parking lot, they're not allowing the omega 3s, right? The good kinds of fats that we need to, really do its job. It's actually preventing them from entering the cell, right? And so what happens is that you don't have a balance, right? And we talked about this optimal balance that we're really trying to look for through nutrition. And so in order for us to have strong cell structure, your kids, right, in reference to what we were talking about, we really should try to shoot for like a 2-to-1 or a 3-to-1 ratio when it comes to omega 3s and omega 6s. So both are essential for our diets. But what happens with the standard American diet, and this is really where a lot of that data comes from, right, is looking at the standard American diet. We're not talking about what diets look like in Europe or other parts of the world, but we're talking about here in the United States. So the data shows us that right now the ratios are off for our kids. And for us as adults, it's 10-to-1. So you're really, again, kind of seeing the, too much of the processed, right, and not enough of, the good stuff, right, like the natural things. And omega 3s are really good when we talk about nutrition deficit disorder as well, because it really helps balance those neurotransmitters so that, you can get the nutritional benefits, through things like, plant-based greens, oils, seeds, fish, etc. But let's just say, for example, that your kid's not too crazy about that. Then that would be, an option to possibly introduce like a fish oil supplement and that sort of thing. But, again, even with supplements, you have to be a little bit careful with, looking at, the ingredients and really making sure that you're getting what you're getting. And it's usually about 500 to 1,000 milligrams of omega-3 fish oil supplements. So that may be something to consider, especially if you're not like a fish person and, really don't want to, make salmon or don't have a taste for seafood or that sort of thing. But in reference to how it can impact students with ADHD or ADD, it does a variety of different things, right? It helps find that balance. It helps calm upset brains, right? So when we think about some of the tendencies of kids who may have those kinds of behaviors, those omega 3s have been proven, right, through research to, effectively, calm their brain. So lots of great things, lots of health benefits that omega 3s can have, but it's also finding a balance with the omega 6s, right, and not excluding them, because you really do need both. So to go back, right, to the question of what's the difference, hopefully that answered it. So it's finding a balance between the two. I'll include a link that will give you, you'll click on it and you'll be able to see where can you find foods with omega 3s, where can you find foods with omega 6s. So that's helpful. I addressed the third question within that, which was about fats, right? And if fats are good for us, what kinds of fat should I eat? But now let's kind of dive into part 2 of that question, which was about meat and protein. So you have to keep in mind, we're talking about the data with the standard American diet. And what tends to happen is that there is a lot of focus when it comes to protein on meats that aren't lean. And so, again, the goal is for the average person, right, to have a focus on, lean cuts of meat for their protein source if they are meat eaters. Now, you can also get protein from non-meat. Okay. So I just want to kind of put that out there. You can get protein from legumes, right? So we think about like lentils, kidney beans, black beans, right? All kinds of beans. We're actually mostly a plant-based family ourselves. And my children tend to be mostly plant-based. So if you want some ideas with that, I'm always certainly happy to help. But again, the idea is to really, limit, not take away, but limit the amounts of, protein in terms of pork and beef, right? And really just eat it in moderation. And it's hard to do because we live in Texas and there's a barbecue place on every corner. So I understand how that is hard to do. But again, when we kind of go back to our discussion on fat, right, and we think about, well, why is our lean cuts of meat better than others? Think about fats this way too. So like the healthier fats tend to be more liquidy, right? So they're more flowing. So think about like that in your body and how that can be more fluid in your body. Then think about fats that are more solid, right? Some of the things that aren't as healthy for us, and how that sometimes, and this is where the research comes in with, like the American Heart Association, for example, or even the American Academy of Pediatrics, that says over time, when too much of those, let's say fattier cuts of meat or too much consumption of red meat, as an example, or too much pork, how that can really lead to cardiovascular issues and heart issues later on in life. So you may not see it right away with your child, but over time, right, those habits will just continue to develop and develop. So again, it's not about taking that T-bone steak away. As I mentioned yesterday, it's just about moderation. And that's really key here. That's the key to your child's diet. That's the key to your own personal diet. It's moderation and finding something that, that works for you all, that you can still have a healthy relationship with food, that you can still get those essential macronutrients, and especially for your children that we focused on yesterday, which was making sure that they are getting the essential things that they need, to continue to grow, especially with their brain, and really perform at their best in the classroom, at home, right, or even in sports. So hopefully, I was able to answer, those questions. And the final question I received, which was a really good one. This is actually I got this one the most, multiple times, which was, how do I get my kids to eat healthier? Like, oh, this sounds really great and wonderful, but I don't know how to apply it and I don't know where to start. So again, I'm going to reference that handout that Mrs. Williams shared with you yesterday. So one thing I want to say is, it's about progress, not perfection. Okay. You're going to set yourself up for failure if you want to just do a complete turnaround of everything that's going on, with let's say your family meals currently. It's all about just taking baby steps and implementing reasonable change, right? Because we're talking about behavior change, and that's really what I do professionally, right? Is focus on behavior change, with clients that I work with. So it's trying to create new habits, right? And implementing a new one, focusing on that one, holding yourself accountable to that, one particular or two particular, new habits that you're trying to implement, and then getting better at that. And then through consistency, right? Not only you, but your family will also kind of adapt and get more used to it. So I thought that this was a really great starting place for a lot of you. So I just want to bring your attention here to where it says healthy substitution list. And again, I'm going to include the link to this document in this follow-up, just because I had so many of you that were wanting help with this area. And so, again, it's something simple. It's not taking spaghetti night or pasta night away from your kids, but it's more so of finding a better quality of pasta, right? So for example, let's say you're using a white pasta noodle that I mentioned yesterday on the talk. Through that processing, a lot of the essential nutrients that are in that grain are really stripped in that process. So transitioning or shifting to a whole wheat will be a better alternative, because that your kids are going to get the fiber and protein from that better quality ingredient. So how do you do that? So here's a tip. You can mix. So let's say you're making spaghetti. So half of your spaghetti that you're going to boil on the stove will be white, and the other half will be wheat. So you start that way and you transition. And then you eventually, right, will be at a place where they're used to the taste of the whole wheat, which I did the same thing with my children. And it's a tip that's worked well for a lot of my clients, is just transitioning them, right? And sometimes it's about explaining, because you're going to get the question of, why am I eating this brown noodle versus this white one? And you can just say, again, kind of using, it's all about our delivery. It's explaining, Well, in this brown wheat pasta, there's a lot of things in it, like protein and fiber, that are going to, and then you explain, help you perform better, help you be a better student, help you focus more, help you run faster. So, whatever resonates with your child, that's a way to have that conversation, to at least have them be open minded. Now, also, I want you to know that the science shows us that it takes 8 to 10 times of introducing something new before a child will actually like it, and accept it. So don't give up after the first try, and don't feel like you have failed. That's another thing too, is, after that first, meal that you worked really hard to prepare, and it gets like a thumbs down. I generally give this advice too, is, whenever introducing something new, have other things on the plate that for sure your kids will eat. So, again, it's thinking about those non-starchy vegetables, those green light foods that we talked about. So, if for example, your kid will have apple slices, or broccoli, or carrots, or cucumbers, which are pretty kid-friendly vegetables, then incorporate that. Even adding half of an avocado, during dinner time will be a great way to incorporate a healthy kind of fat into their diet and get those essential nutrients. So it's all about kind of starting slow. Smoothies are my second tip for those of you who are trying to get your kids to eat a little bit healthier, especially the kids that are a little resistant to chewing new things. I actually, on my YouTube and my Facebook for H2 Life, have some recipe videos. I'll put the links here for easy access for smoothies. So, morning time's a great time. I sent a newsletter months ago on breakfast and the importance of breakfast. And smoothies are a great way to make sure that your kids are getting, a good start to their day, especially right before school time. And I know as teachers, you'll definitely appreciate that behavior change when they're sitting in your classroom too. So smoothies are a really great way. Sometimes it's just about preparation and changing it up. So if your kids did not like, let's say, Brussels sprouts, and this is just a personal experience. My kids did not like them the very first time they tried them. They're like, these are gross. These are disgusting. But I didn't want to give up, because I really enjoy Brussels sprouts, and I know that they're really nutritious and good for you. Same thing with asparagus, but it's just about trying new ways to prepare it. So, okay, they didn't like it steamed. Great. Now let me try sauteing. All right. Maybe it was a little bit more accepted. But the air fryer was a really great way for my kids to really enjoy Brussels sprouts, because one, I did not have to, I should say, drown it in oil, right? In order to fry it up, I was able to use a healthier alternative like the air fryer. And I was able to use a healthier sort of fat like olive oil to kind of coat it, with a little sea salt, a little pepper, whatever spices, your kids may be into. And then, throwing it into the air fryer so that it can kind of crisp. So it gets that like crunchy texture. And kids at this age, let's just be honest, tend to be drawn towards that crunchy texture. So that might be a really great way to introduce Brussels sprouts, sometimes even separating like the leaves, as an example, more like chips. So doing that with like kale as an example might be a helpful tool. Zucchini is another way to kind of slice them thinly, coat them again. There's lots of different recipes for that sort of thing, which I'll include here. Soups are a really great way to incorporate vegetables, just because they absorb, the flavor of that broth. And so sometimes it's a little bit easier for kids to, digest and kind of wrap their heads around eating something new for the first time. So soups are a great way. Smoothies, I had mentioned, just getting creative with like the texture, the preparation. But this is my best advice to you all as parents, is to keep it simple. So, it's not about finding all these new and fabulous recipes. It's about thinking about what you currently eat in your home and just trying to make a little adjustment, right? So it's a little tweak. It's not, completely doing an overhaul, but it's just a little adjustment. So, if you have family pizza night, have family pizza night. But again, it's finding that balance in moderation. So what does the rest of that plate look like? that is providing, right, the nutrition that your child needs for brain development, right, and for good behavior, and that's allowing them to really, be at their optimal health. So, taking that pizza night, maybe moderating, right? So again, it's all about moderation, making sure that, okay, instead of, let's say, having them eat the whole pizza, maybe they're eating, 3 slices instead. And maybe the other part is, maybe I'm chopping up, cucumber, celery sticks, and carrot sticks. So, again, it's just finding that balance. Same thing with, taco night. You can totally make taco night work. Again, it's just about taking the foods that you're currently eating and just doing a healthier swap. So don't get overwhelmed with that. I'm going to include some tips here. I was also asked about meal planning as well. So I'll include a link to hopefully make meal planning, a little bit easier for you and your family. But again, don't overwhelm yourself. Don't feel like you need to throw everything out in your kitchen or your pantries. It's not about that. It's just about being mindful. And that's really at the root of, what we were talking about yesterday, right? Is just being a little bit more mindful in our choices when, we are having those birthday parties or, those celebrations, or, when we, are trying to select what kind of things we're going to sell at concession stands, or, the lunch menu, or how we pack our kids' lunches. It's just being more mindful in that. And you will absolutely start to see, a change in your child's, ability to focus and perform better. Because at the end of the day, that's what we all want, right? As educators, and as parents, is to, provide our children with what they need. We're sending our kids to, the best schools, right? We always want to make sure that they have the support that they need. They have the best coaches, that they, have all of these things, the best technology, and, well, I need to make sure that, they're in these programs. But a lot of times what happens is that we really don't focus on the nutrition aspect. And that's really one of the most important, parts of their growth and development. So I hope that was helpful. Thank you all for reaching out to me. Again, I really appreciate that. It's much easier for me to speak right now without, having something cover my face. So I appreciate your patience yesterday. And I really appreciate you all reaching out to me as well. So I'm going to include those resources, for you to take a look at. I hope that I was able to address some of your questions. And then I was going to mention, I ran out of time yesterday, but if you want to be added to my monthly newsletter, where I do get into different topics and provide recipes and tips and things like that, just feel free to message me at the h2lifenb@gmail.com, and I'll add you. I'm actually working on this month's edition now. And I think that's about it. So again, thank you for allowing me to follow up with you, to address your questions, to get into a little bit more detail. If you do need, I have some extra copies. I can always drop them off at the school. If you want the whole packet that was provided yesterday, that just kind of gave you a rundown, especially with the healthier substitution list, or the list of the additives, I'm happy to send that. So again, thank you, Mrs. Williams. I appreciate you and everything that you're doing at the school. Thank you, teachers. You all are such a blessing. I'm so amazed by what you do each and every day. I thought teaching was hard when I was a teacher way back when, but you all are just truly amazing people, and thank you for what you're doing. Talk to you soon.